Chapter 341. Nolan turned his head to look at Maisie and saw her stiff and upright posture as if she was in military training. He could not help but burst into laughter. But this scene was photographed. And anyone with a discerning eye could see that the smile was overflowing with affection. After taking a few photos, Nolan still picked the first picture when he was choosing which one to keep. After leaving the city hall, Maisie laughed out of anger when she saw the photo that he had chosen. "You actually chose this one. I look so ugly in this one." Nolan rubbed her head. "You don't look ugly, but very cute instead." Maisie indeed did not look unsightly. Otherwise, she would not have surprised him with her appearance when they first met. However, after getting along with her for a longer time, he realized that even the most breathtaking woman could have such a sweet side. She can sometimes be so silly that she looks adorable. Maisie pouted. "This man's appearance is really divine. He looks so good when he smiles. On the other hand, I look like an extremely cautious and nervous fool. The more I look at it, the funnier it looks." Hashtag Mr. Goldman and Maisie Vanderbilt have tied the knot. Hashtag their marriage registration had found itself a spot on Google Trends. Apart from the celebrities in the entertainment industry, Nolan was the only person in Bassburg who had such a level of influence. Some netizens, who had also been at the city hall to obtain their marriage certificate and met the couple there, even posted the photos that they had taken. The comment section was filled with both blessings and envious comments. After Willow saw the news that Maisie and Nolan had gotten married, she abruptly stood up from the sofa. "They've gotten married? Fuck. Why? Why did everything that I fought so hard to acquire in life end up in the hands of that slut? Why can't I defeat that bitch in anything?" That was when her cell phone rang. Seeing that it was a call from Lady Wolfsbane, she picked up the call and answered it calmly next to her ear. "Hello?" The other party asked nonchalantly, "Have you seen the news?" Willow gnashed her teeth. "Yes, that bitch actually got married to Nolan." Thinking of something, she asked, "Didn't you say that Nolan's grandfather wouldn't allow them to be together? What's going on now?" Willow had originally been delighted deep down. They can't be together as long as Elder Master Goldman doesn't agree with their marriage. If I can't be with him, why should I just sit here and watch as Maisie gets to be with him? Humph. Since when did I say that it's your turn to question me? Willow subconsciously realized that she had been too impulsive. If it weren't for this woman's money and the fact that she could get me out of the underground freeway, I would never obey any of her arrangements. The other party then said slowly, "If you want to be with Nolan, your best bet is to get rid of Maisie for good, as it's meaningless to harm the people around her now. Think about it carefully." Rowena hung up the call in the restroom as her hand that was holding the phone tightened. They actually got married. How could the man that I love become the husband of another woman? But even if they've gotten married, it's not that I no longer have any chance. As long as I make something happen and change Nolan's marital status from married to widowed. Rowena heard some commotion coming from outside the toilet cubicle all of a sudden, and her expression changed slightly as she came out of the cubicle hurriedly. Nobody could confirm that she had heard something, but the female employee, who was so frightened that she knocked over the trash can, said nervously after running into Rowena, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." Rowena squinted her eyes and walked toward her with a kind smile. "What did you hear?" "I didn't hear anything." The female staff member did not dare to look her in the eyes. What she had heard was something extremely awful. Rowena gave off a tender smile, raised her hand, placed it on her shoulder gently, and took a glance at her employee tag. "Strategic Department Meryl Yonker, don't be nervous. I'm just asking, don't worry. I won't make things difficult for you." After that, she leaned into her ear and added, "I can even give you a promotion and a raise, as long as you can keep it a secret for me." Chapter 342. Meryl gulped her saliva when she heard the phrases promotion and raise. She became rather excited. "Really? Really? I won't lie to you. You'll get it as long as you want it. Rowena's glamorous eyes looked sincere, and there was still a smile on her face. Meryl nodded nervously. Don't worry, I won't tell anyone. Being able to work in a big company like the Black Gold Group, the benefits and salary that she got were already very good. A promotion and an increment were something that Meryl could only think of in her dreams. When Meryl left, the smile on Rowena's face gradually disappeared and was replaced by a hint of ruthlessness. She picked up her cell phone expressionlessly and sent a message. Stone, help me to get rid of someone. I'll send you the details later. The sooner, the better. At Soul Jewelry Studio. Z. Dena's renovation might have to be delayed for another week. Kennedy reported the renovation's progress to Maisie. Maisie did not feel very anxious and only gave off a smile. It's okay. Let's talk about it when it's finished. Kennedy felt helpless. You're the one who told me out of the blue back then that you want to move there, but you don't seem to be in a hurry and want to stay longer now? Maisie, who got read through like a book, pouted. What, I'm just not in a hurry. Dena is so big, after all. It'll take time to renovate it. We have to understand the hardship that those workers face and not rush them. Kennedy smiled without saying anything. He had seen through her, but chose not to talk about it. Maisie's phone rang all of a sudden. She picked it up and took a glance at it. An unfamiliar number? She answered the call hesitantly before she realized that it was from Titus. Maisie drove back to the Goldman mansion. She had already had a vague idea about why the old man was looking for her. It's probably because of the marriage between Nolan and me. Titus sat on the couch while Mr. Cheshire poured him tea. Maisie walked up to the table. Are you looking for me? Titus put the teacup down heavily, glared at Maisie, and reprimanded in a bad tone, You still got married to Nolan. After all. Maisie's eyelids drooped, and her tone sounded calm. Sir, I know that you have concerns about my relationship with the de Armas, but I still want to tell you today that the matter between the de Armas and the Goldmans has nothing to do with me. I've never participated in it in the past, even my mother was never involved, and I won't be involved in it in the future too. Regardless of the personal grievances between the de Armas and the Goldmans. It has nothing to do with me. It's easy for you to say. Titus' gaze looked sharp and stern. Do you know why Nolan's mother was kidnapped by the de Armas back then? They did so to force the Goldmans back into a coma. I'm against your relationship with Nolan because I don't want to see the incident that took place 15 years ago repeat itself. I bet Hernandez must know that you and Nolan are now married. Titus' explanation made Maisie pause and frown in doubt. So what if he knows? Titus ridiculed her naivety. If Hernandez were to use you to threaten Nolan someday in the future, what do you think Nolan will do? And to what extent will he go for you? Maisie did not say anything. The de Armas. Would that grandfather of mine really use me to threaten Nolan? Maisie pursed her lips and clenched the hands that were resting next to her body. Don't worry. I won't let myself be used as a tool to threaten Nolan. My only relative is my father, Stephen Vanderbilt. Even if I'm related to the de Arma, they're not my relatives. Maisie made everything clear. I grew up in the Vanderbilts, and I've only had my father after my mother died. So regardless of whether I have a grandfather or not, in the end, I don't even know him and have never met him face to face. Chapter 343. Coupled with the grudges between the de Armas and the Goldmans, it's even more impossible for me to acknowledge the de Armas so casually. Titus' expression looked a little surprised upon seeing that Maisie had taken a firm stand. However, it soon disappeared. He then said solemnly after a long time, You better remember what you've said today. Otherwise, I won't let you go even if it means that my grandson will hate me for the rest of my life. Maisie was startled. Is he saying that he's changed his mind? She smiled and replied. I'll remember it. Mr. Cheshire sent Maisie to the door. He was happy for Maisie and Nolan when he heard that Titus had acquiesced in their marriage. "How are the kids doing recently?" Mr. Cheshire asked. Maisie gave off a smile. "They're doing very well." Mr. Cheshire then explained earnestly, "Actually, Elder Master Goldman likes the 3 kids very much. It's just that he doesn't know how to get along with them. After all, Elder Master Goldman was too busy when he was young. Not only did he have no time to take care of Mr. Goldman Sr., but he also didn't give the young Mr. Goldman much chance to meet his grandfather in person. Titus had had no time to take care of his son, so he rarely met his grandson, too. Even if he loved children, he did not know how to express it. Thus, he did not know how to maintain a good relationship with them." Maisie could understand the underlying meaning of his words. When she recalled that Titus had visited the kids at the hospital to see if something had happened to them, it proved that the old man really cared about the children. Maisie left the Goldman mansion in her car, but a car abruptly dashed out of the side at an intersection. She turned the steering wheel and slammed on the brakes. A harsh screech sounded, but she collided with it after all. Fortunately, the speed of both cars was not fast, but a collision of this level would still damage the car. Maisie sat in the car as she had yet to recover from the fright. She then pulled the handbrake, opened the door, got out of the car, and walked toward the other car. The man sitting in that car had not gotten out of his car, after all. She knocked on the window, and the young man sitting in the driver's seat lowered the window slowly. Just as Maisie was about to speak, someone grabbed her throat from behind all of a sudden and then covered her mouth and nose with a cloth. Maisie grasped the man's arm with her hand, smelled a pungent smell of a processed solution on the cloth, and gradually lost her strength. The 2 men, who then got out of the back seat, moved her into the car together. The door closed, and the car fled the scene in a hurry. Nolan came to Soul Jewelry Studio, and his brows were slightly creased when he realized that there was no one in the office. Where did that woman go again? Mr. Goldman? When Kennedy, who was walking toward the office, saw a figure standing outside the door, he knew that he was there looking for Maisie. Nolan turned around to look at him. Where is she? Z answered a phone call and went out. She said she was going back to the Goldman mansion. Didn't she tell you? She went back to the mansion? Nolan's eyes narrowed slightly. Could this be grandfather's doing? Thinking of something, he left hurriedly without replying to Kennedy. Rowena met Nolan, who was in a hurry, and smiled. Nolan, are you going? Nolan bumped her away as if he did not see her and resolutely walked out of the entrance. Rowena, who was ignored and left behind on the spot, bit her lip. Just as she was doing so, she received a text message on her cell phone. When she read through the content of the message, the corners of her lips twitched coldly. Nolan drove back to the Goldman mansion. Mr. Cheshire was stunned when he saw that Nolan had hurried back with a gloomy expression. Mr. Goldman, you. Chapter 344. Where's my grandfather? Elder Master Goldman just went to bed for a nap, Mr. Cheshire replied. What about Maisie? Didn't my grandfather summon her over? Seeing that Nolan was anxious about this matter, Mr. Cheshire grinned. Elder Master Goldman did summon Ms. Vanderbilt back here, but don't worry, he didn't make things difficult for her. Instead, he took a step backward and agreed to your marriage. A hint of surprise flashed across Nolan's eyes. He then thought of something and asked in an indifferent tone. Did he name any condition? Judging from Grandpa's temperament, he must have agreed with our marriage only after some compromises were made. Mr. Cheshire nodded. Elder Master Goldman agreed only after seeing Ms. Vanderbilt's firm stand in the Goldman's position. He was afraid that the de Arma would use Ms. Vanderbilt to deal with you. Ms. Vanderbilt promised that she wouldn't let the de Armas succeed in doing so, and Elder Master Goldman asked her to promise him that before he nodded. Mr. Cheshire thought of something and added, by the way. Is Ms. Vanderbilt's father all right? In fact, Elder Master Goldman went to talk to Ms. Vanderbilt's father the other day because Miss Summers said something to him before that. Elder Master Goldman didn't know about Ms. Vanderbilt's father's injury up until now. Come to think of it. It was such a coincidence. Nolan's eyes turned gloomy, but he did not have the time to think anymore. Where's Z? Ms. Vanderbilt left a while back. Nolan quickly walked out of the courtyard and received a call from Quincy as soon as he exited the mansion. Quincy said something to Nolan, and the latter's expression turned cold as if it had been covered in snow. At the same time, the air pressure surrounding him dropped abruptly. When Maisie opened her eyes and regained consciousness, she found herself in a vacant and unrenovated building. Her hands were bound, and she could barely break free. Someone appeared outside all of a sudden. Maisie Vanderbilt, you've finally fallen into my hands, haven't you? Willow's voice sounded sharp and loud. One of the two men following Willow was the man who was in the driver's seat. Only then did Maisie realize something. It seemed that the accident that I ran into was part of a scheme. Maisie took a deep breath, looked at Willow, and asked calmly, "So you're the one who planned it?" Willow walked in front of her with her arms crossed. There was a hint of ruthlessness in her smirk. "So what if it's me?" She stepped forward, raised her arm to slap Maisie, and asked viciously, "Aren't you very imposing all the time? How does it feel to be slapped now?" She then slapped her again after saying so. A flushed mark appeared on both Maisie's cheeks, one on each side. She licked the inner wall of her cheeks with the tip of her tongue and then clicked her tongue. She looked up at Willow and laughed out loud. "You tied me up just to get your revenge with these two slaps?" This peal of laughter infuriated Willow, so she raised her hand and slapped her again. Her sharp fingernails scraped Maisie's cheek, and a shallow wound appeared. Willow grabbed Maisie's hair and said fiercely, "You never thought you would end up in this situation today, right? Bitch, I might have failed to kill those 3 bastards of yours, but I won't miss my shot this time around." Even though Maisie seemed to be in discomfiture at the moment, she was still exuding a cold, arrogant aura as if she had no plan to yield. Maisie's expression turned sulky and frigid, especially after Willow admitted her previous scheme. "So you're the person who plotted that accident?" "Ha ha ha, that's right, but what can you do about it?" Willow jerked her hair. "Are you feeling bad for them? It's a pity that I couldn't hurt those 2 little bastards." Maisie's eyes looked gloomy and cold. "It's really her. Oh, by the way, about Dad. Oh no, he's no longer my father. The accident that caused Stephen to be hospitalized was also my doing." Chapter 345. Willow admitted all the things that she had done bluntly, and there was a hint of ridicule in her eyes. "Anyway, what can you do even if you get to know it now? Maisie, since I'm not living a good life, how can you live a better life than me? I hate this. Why am I not Stephen Vanderbilt's biological daughter, and why don't I share the same luck and background as Maisie? So, I'll make sure you disappear from this world forever. No one will snatch anything from me or go against me ever again as soon as you disappear for good. Anyway, my mother is already in jail, and I've lost everything. I don't even have a home now, so what's there to be afraid of?" Looking at that insane and morbid state that Willow was in, Maisie did not feel pity for her at all. Instead, she felt Willow was utterly pathetic. "Willow Vanderbilt, you really never reflect on yourself from your own perspective, huh? Aren't you the one who chose to tread down this path yourself?" Maisie asked her again. "What right do you think you have to tell me this? This is all your fault." Willow gnashed her teeth and increased the intensity of her grip. Maisie frowned slightly, but she did not cry out in pain, let alone beg Willow for mercy. "Since when did I hurt you? Have you forgotten what you did to me 6 years ago? Aren't you the person who plotted against me first and has been trying to make a move on me over and over again? Willow, how did you manage to muster the courage to stand in front of me and disguise yourself as a victim? You totally deserve this." Maisie was on the verge of screaming at her. Willow was so agitated that her face turned pallid, and she raised her hand, "You bitch." The arm that was in midair was subdued by Maisie, who had broken free of the rope. Maisie turned Willow around, strangled her neck with her elbow, and pressed the sharp edge of the ring on her finger against Willow's neck. Maisie then warned the two men who wanted to rush up to her fiercely, "Stay right where you are if you don't want her to die. Unless you don't want to get paid by her, you can both come at me together. I'll definitely drag you to hell together with me if I can't escape death today." The words she had just uttered were nothing more than a diversion to buy her more time to snap the rope with her ring. "I wouldn't be able to do so if I hadn't been wearing the ring all this while." The two men froze in place. They did not want to die, and they had not even gotten paid yet. Willow shouted at them abruptly, "Don't believe in what she said. She won't have the guts to do anything to me." Something sharp stabbed her in the neck. Although the stab was not deep, it hurt a lot. The two men really did not dare to take another step forward when they saw the blood on Willow's neck. Maisie Vanderbilt. What are you trying to do?" Willow was genuinely scared for her life now. The pain coming from her neck made her face pale, gradually. She did not expect that Maisie would actually dare to hurt her. Maisie scoffed. "Don't you know what I'm doing?" Willow Vanderbilt. "Do you really think I don't have the guts to make a move on you? I'm telling you, you won't be able to leave this place if you dare to kill me. I still have a few men outside. You won't get to live much longer if I die here." Willow could only feel the thing that was stabbed into her neck go deeper again, and she did not even dare to breathe anymore. "Don't just care about how things will turn out for me. You should care about yourself instead. After all, they're helping you commit crimes just for your money. I can still pay them even if you die." Maisie's casual statement made Willow's lips pale and dry. Maisie looked at the two men. "No matter how much she's promised to pay you, I'll double that amount. After all, Mr. Goldman is my husband, and I have plenty of money to spare." Chapter 346. Maisie glanced at Willow and smiled. "Rather than ask her for money, why not ask me? It's just money." The men hesitated. Willow's expression changed. "Don't trust her." "Willow, why are you putting up a fight when you're already in trouble?" Maisie got close to her ear and scoffed. "When I'm done with you, there's no way they will be able to get the money from you anymore." At that moment, the two guards were tossed in. A few bodyguards in black came in with weapons. And when the two men tried to run, they were tackled onto the floor and held down. Nolan slowly walked through the door like an angel, descending from the heavens. The aura he emitted froze the entire area. His coldness subsided a little when he realized that Maisie was the one holding hostages. "Nolan, save me. Maisie has gone mad, she wants to kill me." Willow started yelling the moment she saw Nolan. Nolan didn't look at her, nor did he acknowledge her. He instead looked at the bodyguards. The men walked to Maisie and pulled Willow away from her. Maisie walked to Nolan, and he noticed a light scratch on her face the moment she approached. His eyes grew cold. He raised his hand to the scratch. "Who did this?" Maisie raised her brows. "Who else?" Nolan's sharp gaze turned toward Willow and walked over to her. He raised his hand at the bodyguards, and they passed a weapon to him. Maisie paused. Was Nolan going to? Bang! Willow's screams followed the shot. A hole immediately appeared on her left arm, and blood dripped onto her clothes. Nolan's eyes were unwavering. He was pretty much cold-blooded as he took another shot at her right arm. Willow screamed her lungs out, the chilling voice echoing throughout the building. The pain of a bullet tearing through one's arm was extremely excruciating. Nolan changed the clip with one hand, added 2 more bullets, and shot 2 more shots, 1 to each leg. Willow fell to the floor with a thump. She bit her tongue because of the pain, and blood came out of her mouth. Even her limbs were covered in blood. Tears fell from the corner of her eyes. Her face was full of fear. Nolan gave the gun to the bodyguard, took out a handkerchief to wipe his blood-spattered hand, and threw that to the floor. "That's the price you pay for touching Maisie." There were no emotions in his words. The cruel act even scared the two men hugging their heads on the floor. Nolan turned around and tapped the shoulder of the bodyguard. "Find a good family in the countryside and send her over. Now that her limbs are useless, she can still be useful to make babies. I'm sure the hillbillies wouldn't mind." As for these two, Nolan's cold gaze turned toward the two men still holding their heads and begging on their knees. "She made us do this. We haven't done anything." Nolan ignored their pleas and said to the bodyguards, "Do as you please, just leave them alive." He left with Maisie after that. The painful cries of the two men echoed throughout the building. Chapter 347. In the car. Nolan brought out the medical kit and tended to the scratch on Maisie's face. Even though it was a light scratch, it might leave a scar if they weren't careful. Maisie didn't say a word nor look at Nolan. "Did you think that I was cruel? Were you afraid?" Nolan frowned. He knew he might have scared her, but he couldn't control himself. He had been furious and wanted to kill Willow. Maisie looked at him and moved her lips. "It's fine." His eyes were cold as his lips opened. "What do you mean it's fine?" Maisie put out her arms to hug him, putting her face on his burning chest. Her action stunned Nolan. You dash." Maisie lowered her eyes, hid in his warm embrace, and smiled. "Nolan, I know you wouldn't hurt me, so I wouldn't be afraid of you. Thanks for coming to save me." The coldness in Nolan's eyes slowly melted away. He raised his hand, touched her head, and kissed her with a smile. I won't let anyone who tries to hurt you off easily." That evening, at Blue Bay Villa, Nolan carried Maisie back to the room. His words moved Maisie. Even though it was the first time she had seen such cruelty, it was done for her. Maisie remembered something and raised her head. "How did you know that I was there? Do you think I wouldn't be able to find you if I wanted to?" Nolan kissed the back of her hand. But something came to his mind. He frowned and calmly said, "I was worried that I was late. If I really was late and something happened to you, I would hate myself." He couldn't imagine what he would be like if something happened to Maisie. Maisie laughed and raised her hand to touch his head to console him. She was surprised by her own actions. Nolan's eyes darkened. He raised his hand to hold the back of her head and kissed her. When Maisie had a chance to catch a breath, she took in a deep breath, her cheeks red. "Nolan. We need to pick the kids up from school, mm." Nolan brought her to the bed, and in the scuffle that ensued, he lowered his voice. "Tonight, there'll only be the two of us." "Nolan, you scoundrel." He had been all serious a few hours ago, and now he had totally changed. Nolan smiled and took off all her clothes. "Yes, I'm a scoundrel." The two of them spent the whole night together since the children weren't around. After that, Maisie lay in bed, unable to muster even a bit of energy. She had to let her man carry her downstairs out of kindness. An exquisite candlelit dinner was laid out on the dining table, and a bouquet of black roses half her height was laid on the chair. Maisie, who was let down, was stunned. Such a romantic move? Black roses cost a lot, not to mention such a big bouquet. She couldn't even carry it. "Of course, our first night should be romantic." He laughed. She would have forgotten if he didn't mention it. Nolan hugged her from behind, laying his chin on her shoulder, and said in a deep voice, I heard that the old man has agreed to our marriage. From today, you'll be the wife of Nolan Goldman, Mrs. Goldman. Let's pick a date and have our official wedding. It can't be a small one. It should be grand so that you become the envy of all." Chapter 348. Maisie inadvertently smiled upon hearing the promise from the man behind her. "You said it yourself." The next day, Rowena got to the office and walked past a few employees gossiping at the front desk. Mr. Goldman and Ms. Vanderbilt have been acting too sweet ever since they registered. They were being secretive before this, but now they don't even try to hide it anymore. There's nothing to hide since they're married now. Mr. Goldman really pampers her. I'm glad I shipped them. Rowena stopped in her tracks with a dark cloud over her head. Rowena had lost contact with Willow the day before, so she could guess that she had failed. Luckily, she hadn't used her own phone to contact Willow. Even if Nolan investigated, it wouldn't link back to her. The elevator door opened, and she saw Maisie walking out, holding onto Nolan's arm. They were really not hiding anymore, just like what those women had been discussing. When Maisie saw Rowena, she turned her eyes and hugged Nolan's arm tightly, smiling. Honey, I want to go on a date today. Nolan's amber eyes squinted when he heard her calling him honey out of the blue, then he realized that her change was because of Rowena. His pretty little wife was possessive. He looked at the woman next to him. Where do you want to go? Maisie raised her brows. Somewhere exciting. The coldness in Rowena's eyes could not be hidden when she saw them being closed without caring about the people around them. She walked toward them with a stoic face and looked straight at Maisie. Nolan has a meeting in the afternoon. You should care more about his work. Really? Maisie looked up at Nolan. Didn't you say that you have nothing on and can spend time with me? Nolan nodded. I did. Rowena pursed her lips and said, Nolan, but the meeting this afternoon, Miss Summers. You're Noel's special assistant, and Noel's is the owner of Black Gold. Can't you carry on with the meeting as his special assistant? Maisie smiled at her. Rowena held her fists. When it was Quincy, he did a lot of things for Knowles. I understand how tough it has been for Knowles. After so much time, can't he even have a day off? Furthermore, you shouldn't call him by his name. People might think that you have something going on with my husband. Maisie did that intentionally because hearing Rowena call him Nolan annoyed her. Rowena looked troubled but replied. I've been doing this since we were kids. I'm used to it. Change it. Knowles is no longer single, and I'm his wife. I don't like hearing you call him that. Maisie raised her brows. Even though she knew that she was getting on Rowena's nerves, she really didn't care that much before this. But it was different now. Nolan, didn't you hear what my wife said? Don't call me that any longer. Nolan interrupted Rowena without caring about her feelings and left with Maisie with his arm around her. Rowena froze on the spot and bit her lip hard. She would make Maisie regret it one day. At the underground parking lot. When Maisie was getting into the car, Nolan pulled her over, held her against the car, and ran his finger over her chin. Chapter 349. Maisie batted her lashes and said, What are you doing, Nolan? Weren't you happily calling me honey just now? Why the change now, He wasn't happy. Maisie stuttered, I was just annoying her because she's coveting my man. Coveting her man? Nolan was extremely happy with her reply. He put his hand on her waist, got closer, and smiled. What kind of excitement were you referring to? Maisie shuddered and held down his hand. Nolan, don't do anything here. I didn't mean this kind of excitement. This terrible man. Wasn't he afraid his health would be affected if he kept thinking about that? Nolan smiled but didn't say a word. You said that you were going to spend the entire day with me, so you're going to agree to whatever I want to do, right? Maisie beamed. Nolan raised his brows. Tell me what's on your mind then. He seemed to be enjoying how she wanted to spend time with him. Maisie smiled and said, everything, go watch a movie and shop around like a normal couple. Seeing Nolan's face drop a little, Maisie shook his arm and said playfully, I want to experience the romantic feeling of shopping with my boyfriend. Nolan paused. He had never experienced watching a movie or shopping before either, because he never needed to. However, because of a certain coquettish woman, he just couldn't say no. Maisie and Nolan appeared at the cinema. When a beautiful couple showed up, they would immediately become the main focus. Maisie turned to Nolan and said, "I'll get the tickets. Wait here." She then walked toward the machines. A lot of girls who walked past couldn't keep their eyes off Nolan. "Did you see that man? He's so handsome. There's no one with him. Do you want to go talk to him and get his number?" A few girls pushed each other and walked toward Nolan happily. "Hello, can we have your number? Please?" Nolan stared at the few girls. He remembered something, smiled, then pressed his lips together. He said in a dead tone, "I'm sorry, I'm married." The girls swooned at his dazzling smile. Too bad he was married. Who was that lucky woman? "Honey." The beautiful and classy woman walked over and held his arm. Maisie looked at the few girls, smiled, and said, "I'm sorry, my husband can't give you his number." "It's all right." The girls smiled awkwardly. Maisie pulled Nolan away, feeling a little annoyed. Was it a mistake to bring him out? He would attract women too easily. Nolan's lips curled upon seeing the woman feeling jealous. At the Goldman mansion. What? Nolan went out instead of work? Titus sat on the couch, carefully polishing his collection of china. He frowned when he heard Rowena's report. Rowena lowered her head. "Grandpa, I don't think I'm a good assistant." "Did Nolan put you in a tough spot?" Titus knew that Nolan hadn't been happy when he arranged for Rowena to take Quincy's place. It would be surprising if he treated her well. Rowena shook her head. "No, I just couldn't convince him to focus on his work." Chapter 350. Rowena raised her eyes and said, "Ms. Vanderbilt knew that there was an afternoon meeting but insisted that Nolan spend time with her. He wouldn't listen no matter how I tried. Nolan thinks that I do wrong no matter what I do. If this goes on, Nolan will probably leave the company." A hint of coldness flashed across Rowena's eyes when Titus stopped polishing. Titus wasn't happy with Maisie, to begin with, and what she said definitely pointed to Maisie being the reason Nolan was neglecting the business. How could a cunning woman like that become part of the Goldmans? Unexpectedly, Titus didn't show any signs of anger. He handed the china to Mr. Cheshire and said, "Rowena, you need to understand that Nolan is the CEO of Black Gold. Why would he need Quincy as his assistant if he had to do everything by himself?" Rowena's expression was a little stiff. Furthermore, Nolan just wanted to relax. There shouldn't be a problem if he wanted a day off since he already married that woman. What Titus said shook Rowena. "Grandpa, aren't you unhappy about Ms. Vanderbilt?" "Why?" Titus pressed his lips together. There was no point for him to press on since he had already done so much, yet they still did not give up. "But Ms. Vanderbilt is related to the de Armas. Have you forgotten?" "That's enough." Titus cut her off. "Maisie confirmed her place with me. Since I've chosen to trust her, I can't take it back." He had already gone back on his word once when he agreed for them to get married after she passed her assessment with the troops, but denied them because she was related to the de Armas. He would lose all credibility if he did that again. Rowena bit her lip and didn't say a word. Why was this happening? If Titus accepted their marriage, wouldn't that also mean that he had accepted Maisie as his granddaughter-in-law? No. She wasn't going to let that happen. Maisie walked on the streets with Nolan holding an ice cream cone. She turned to look at the man who had spent 2 hours shopping with her and smiled. "Nolan, how does it feel to shop around with a woman for the first time?" Nolan smiled, a little helpless. "It's all right." Maisie stopped, turned to look at him, and raised her brows. "Are you tired?" Nolan narrowed his eyes. "Why? Should I bring you for a good massage?" Maisie pointed toward a massage parlor after saying that. Nolan's face turned dark. The woman laughed. He put out his arm and carried her sideways. Maisie was surprised. "And Nolan, what are you doing?" "Let me down." Maisie saw all the eyes on them and felt embarrassed and angry. Nolan smiled. Didn't you say a good massage? If you give bad service, you're not getting any sleep tonight. Maisie was rendered speechless. The next day. Maisie's back hurt. She had just been joking, but she almost lost her life in bed. Is that true? That's too much. Mr. Goldman and Ms. Vanderbilt are a married couple. But I heard that Mr. Goldman skipped his afternoon meeting for Ms. Vanderbilt.